There's no doubt that Spider-Man No Way Home was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of movie. From an epic battle between Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin on the bridge, to Sandman speaking with Doctor Strange and Peter, making a film this ambitious would of course require a lot of planning, and as a result, many ideas present in the early film never made it into the final product. However, exactly what story ideas were cut from the original Spider-Man No Way Home? So back in 2019, Sony ended their deal with Marvel to have Spider-Man in the MCU. However, because of that, they had to figure out how they do the story of No Way Home without any MCU connection. While there is no official news on what this story would have been, we do have hints on what this plot could have been like. Presumably, if Sony never renegotiated with Marvel, there are two ways their version of No Way Home could have gone. The first idea is the original Kraven story. We know for a fact that Kraven could have been the villain of the third movie, since John Watts himself pitched it to Tom Holland, and Holland himself even confirmed the idea was really cool. The cliffhanger from Far From Home would have carried forward, with Peter's identity exposed and New York turning against them. In this version, Kraven would try to hunt Peter down for whatever reason, turning the movie into more of a manhunt thriller than a multiverse movie. Spider-Man being chased across the city by Kraven would have made the movie a darker, more street-level story. However, there's still the possibility that Sony may have decided to do a multiverse story anyway, especially considering the success of Into the Spider-Verse a year prior. The problem is, without Marvel, there's no Doctor Strange, no Happy Hogan, no reference to Stark Tech or the wider MCU. So who fills the role of Doctor Strange in the plot? Well, it could have possibly been Madam Web, who would have been introduced as a new character trying to help Peter, but the reason for this is unclear. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield could still appear, and the film would still climax with Peter choosing to sacrifice his identity, but that really depends on what writer they got for the film. So while the movie could still pull off a multiverse hook, it would have been reshaped into Sony's own continuity. This also means that No Way Home would have been the end of the MCU Spider-Man, and from here on out, Spider-Man would either show up in Sony's universe of Spider-Man spin-offs, or they'd reboot the character altogether. When Marvel renegotiated with Sony, they managed to get Spider-Man back into the MCU, and here development would continue on the original multiverse plot. But even then, there were many ideas that were explored, but ultimately were cut from the final movie. If you look back at a lot of fake rumors for No Way Home before its release, you'll notice a repeating pattern. Many of them revolved around Spider-Man actually traveling through the multiverse, dropping into other universes and encountering the alternate versions of himself alongside their villains. Fans clearly had very ambitious expectations for how the multiverse storyline would play out, picturing Peter hopping dimensions like across the Spider-Verse. In the actual film, however, the concept was a lot more simplified. Instead of Peter going to them, the villains and the other Spider-Men are pulled into the MCU. But what most people don't realize is that during the early stages of the movie, this multiversal travel plot actually was an idea they played around with. According to concept art by Phil Saunders and Josh Nizey, there was an early pitch where Spider-Man and Doctor Strange would chase each other through the multiverse itself. In this draft, the spell was tied to the Book of Vishanti, would literally drag them through scenes from earlier Spider-Man films. This means we would have literally seen Peter inside classic Spider-Man films, swinging through famous fight locations. According to concept art by Josh Nizey, he at least imagined the fight ending with Peter hanging Doctor Strange on a building in the rain, reminiscent of the location from Spider-Man 1. A different variation of the final film where Strange is tied up in the mirror dimension instead. This idea of Spider-Man being transported to different locations would still be explored in the movie, though it would no longer involve the multiverse. In an animatic by Phil Lagone, we find out that Doctor Strange using his portals transports Peter to a different location like Valley of Thor and Niagara Falls. However, it seems in the end, they just chose New York and the Grand Canyon as the scenery instead. Did you know that Vulture was originally meant to return in Spider-Man No Way Home, and he actually had a pretty extensive role? From what we can understand, Vulture would be released from prison prior to the events of No Way Home, and in the story, Peter would visit Vulture to help him cure many of the villains. We know this is true thanks to a piece of concept art by Phil Saunders, which sees Spider-Man visiting Vulture at his home, attempting to recruit his help with curing the villains. Now what's interesting is that Vulture's house in this concept art, not to make fun of poor people, but this place doesn't look nearly as luxurious as his house in Homecoming. Well, this is because originally Vulture was meant to be down on his luck and is now instead working at a local junkyard. If we take a look at the conceptual art by Josh Nizey, we see that Vulture has grown a beard and his clothing is clearly old and tattered. It seems the idea of having Peter meet Vulture for help was an idea that was very prevalent in the early script, as another piece of concept art by Henrik Tame showcases this moment once again. However, now it takes place at a junkyard rather than Vulture's lawn. It seems Vulture has lent his repair shop to Peter, and it's here at the repair shop where Peter begins building the various cures for the villains. In the final film, this sequence takes place within Happy Hogan's apartment instead. However, because this scene happens at Vulture's workshop, it means the Green Goblin's betrayal and the arrival of the police and J. Jonah Jameson takes place here as well. We can see this in another piece of concept art where we see Doc Ock, Sandman, Vulture, and some unknown characters within the workshop as the police arrive. We know that Vulture's role would have extended further in the movie, as there is conceptual artwork of Vulture both teaming up with Spider-Man and another artwork of Vulture and some kind of fiery scenery. And here, for some reason, he's fighting Dr. Octopus in this moment. Speaking of Green Goblin's betrayal, there was a different take on this sequence as well. The scene takes place just outside Peter's school at the train station, and in this moment, Aunt May dies here as well, but she does not get killed by the Green Goblin, but by Mysterio instead. In this moment, Peter flies into a violent rage. He attacks Mysterio in anger as he desperately tries to fight off Spider-Man. But Peter, in his anger, is unrelenting. He slams Mysterio all throughout the train station, beating him mercilessly as J. Jonah Jameson records the entire one-sided battle. It seems this may have been a part of Mysterio's plan, framing and portraying Spider-Man in an even more negative light. Though it is important to understand one thing. Mysterio being present in these storyboards doesn't mean he would have been the villain in the movie. You see, in this scene, Mysterio only really served as a stand-in within the plot. This was during a time where the creatives were really unsure on who would return in the movie. The only thing they knew for sure was that Aunt May would be killed by a villain in the film. It just so happens that during this period of the film's development, Mysterio was the villain they considered returning to be the main antagonist. Speaking of Mysterio, he was also present very early in the film's development. Mysterio was actually considered to be the main antagonist of the film, continuing his revenge from Far From Home. Mysterio's goal was to ruin Peter's life as much as he could by portraying him as a murderous maniac. This can be seen in this concept art for the movie, where Mysterio lures Peter to a high school football game, and here, Peter beats on Mysterio. However, that was Mysterio's plan, as he purposely framed the events as Spider-Man attacking a helpless and heroic figure. These events would then be recorded by J. Jonah Jameson, broadcasting it for everyone to see. This does mean that in the original Spider-Man No Way Home, Peter's innocence would not be proven at the beginning of the film, and people would still believe he's a maniac for a majority of the project until something happened to prove his innocence. If the original premise of having Mysterio potentially kill Aunt May was present during this time, you can definitely see how Mysterio was being framed as the ultimate antagonist of the Holland Spider-Man films. Spider-Man No Way Home dropped many of these ideas in the final film, but the story does not lose its ambition. However, there are some ideas here I wish were present in the final movie.